Hey everybody, welcome to Get a Load of This Chick, where we talk about a woman from history you might not have heard of before. Today we're going to be talking about Janet Flanner, a cultural icon who was one of the first writers and journalists for The New Yorker, operating out of Paris, and she wrote the column Letters from Paris, so let's get into it. Janet Flanner was born March 13th, 1892 in Indianapolis, Indiana. By the time she was about 4 years old, she knew she wanted to be a writer. She lived a pretty well afforded lifestyle. She was traveled as a child. Her father ran a successful business and was rather respected within their community in Indianapolis. He worked with dead people. I think it's called like a mortuary. He was a mortician, essentially. He helped dead people be dead and made them look not so dead. She was college educated. In 1912, she went to the University of Chicago, but she found that she wasn't much of a campus girl. She was more into the nightlife and going to bars and listening to jazz. Sad news, her father committed suicide when she was 20 years old in 1912. You might think that this is why she dropped out of college after 2 years, but no, actually it's mostly the reason she stuck around for 2 years. There was a lot of scandal around his suicide, especially because he was not seen as the type of guy who would ever do that sort of thing. But eventually she dropped out of school and she moved back to Indianapolis, where she became one of the very first cinema critics. Now this is like early 1900s. This is around 1914, 1915, 1916, I think, when she like started working for the paper. So this is early days of cinema. This isn't even the talkies. She's just being a critic off of there literally being no frame of reference. There's nothing that she can go off of other than her own opinions and thoughts and what she takes away from film. So she's one of the very first cinema critics for the Indianapolis Star. 1918 happens and she gets married to the only man she is ever going to be romantically linked to. That's a guy named William Lane Rem. What's really interesting is that they have a prenup and they already sort of established from the get-go that they're gonna have separate finances. This marriage ends in 1926 amicably after they have settled down in New York City. Janet Flanner is not entirely straight, if not totally gay, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So in 1918, after she gets married, Janet Flanner and her husband, William Lane Rem, moved to Greenwich Village, where they settled down. And this is where she starts rubbing elbows with some of the literary elite that are going to be the people that get her started in her career. Some of the intellectuals of the Greenwich Village scene. She's sort of on the outskirts of the Algonquin Circle, if anybody knows what that is. I'll talk about it. It's basically a circle of intellectuals that hang out and they talk and they're smart. And so she's around that, but she's not in it, but she's, in enough proximity that she ends up being known, and if not known, respected amongst those people. She quickly becomes friends with a woman named Nasa McMean. She is an illustrator, and then she introduces her to somebody named Harold Ross and his wife Jane Grant. And now these people are the people that changed Janet's life forever. Harold Ross is basically the guy that created The New Yorker, and his wife is like, I feel kind of good about this one. It's where people go to read smart stuff, okay? The New Yorker is where you go to read smart stuff and feel really smart, even today in 2023. The New Yorker at this point is 98 years old. It is just a fledgling idea in 1925. They're like, hey, what if we took journalism and we gave it wit and modernity and sex appeal and danger? And that is what Harold Ross was doing when he was sort of getting all of these journalists together. So Harold Ross has recruited this, the initial ragtag group of journalists that are going to become the first group that creates the voice for The New Yorker. Janet Flanner is among them, and she has said that he was notoriously difficult but rewarding to work for. He wouldn't hire people if he didn't find them talented, and if they started to disappoint him, they were out on their ears. So in 1918, Janet Flanner meets a woman named Solita Solano, who is the new drama critic for the New York Tribune. And romance blossoms. If you were a lesbian in that era, you just became best friends with someone and nobody bothered you. So Janet Flanner met her best friend Solita Solano in 1918. Janet Flanner is not entirely straight, if not totally gay, but we'll get into that a little bit later. In 1921, Janet Flanner travels with Solano to Greece, while Solano is working for National Geographic, and it is on this trip that they eventually make their way over to Paris. Paris is the city that changes Janet Flanner's life forever. This is where Janet Flanner writes her very first novel, The Cubicle City. At this point, she's kind of with Solano, but mostly just writing, but figuring out her own thing. And then eventually, 1925, Harold Ross gets in touch with her and he goes, "Hey, remember that magazine that I was talking about when we were in New York? I think I'm gonna do it, and I think I want you to write for it." And she goes, "Okay." I imagine she doesn't say it like that, but she does say, "Okay, that's really exciting. What do you want me to write about?" And he goes, "Well, I figured we could use like a European presence, and you are living in Europe. Maybe we could do something with that." And she says, "Yeah." 1925, Janet Flanner is part of the very first edition of The New Yorker, writing Letters from Paris. It was a weekly column that she would send out, and it would just talk about what's going on in Paris and, the exciting things that were happening. In my research about her, I have a bunch of books that she's mentioned, but it doesn't really talk about her. All it says is Janet Flanner said. So I got this little ditty. This is Paris Was Yesterday by Janet Flanner. Here she writes about Isadora Duncan. Here she talks about preparation for war, because, you have to. Right here, she's talking about my boy Picasso. Yeah, she rubbed elbows with Picasso. Jealous. So this is just the start of her career. Hanging out, talking for a living to the most eminent voices of the lost generation. She was talking about celebrity gossip, what's new in the world of painting, in the world of writing, in culture, in music. She covered jazz in Paris after the war. She covered writing and art in Paris before it. She just had her finger on the pulse. She was one of those 1920s wit people that was just literary magazines have no room for opinions except my own, just like that. Hey, up until 1939, when she does go back to the United States and is not in Paris during World War II, she continues to write, but she does so in New York. So Janet Flanner leaves Paris before the war and then returns after, where she lives from 1944 until 1972. She passed away in 1978, living in New York. But this is the thing. It makes television appearances. There are interviews. She's being carted around as if she is some celebrity, because she is. This is a time when being a literary critic, being the person that says this is good, this is why it's good, actually really meant something. And not that it doesn't anymore, it's just that it was the beginning of this idea. Janet Flanner was also kind of a player. She had a thing for leggy blondes, She had a thing with this Parisian singer Noelle Haskins Murphy in 1932, and then another thing with another woman when she got back to New York. In this whole period of time, she is still with Solita Solano. They kind of have an open relationship deal. So she meets a woman named Natalie Dana C. Murray, who works for NBC, and that romance blossoms. Where did they meet? On Fire Island. Tell me she's not gay. And they are together until Janet Flanner's death in 1978. So that is Janet Flanner in a nutshell. I have this book right here, Paris Was Yesterday, and then I have another book I highly encourage you to check out. Sorry, it's on my table, and that's why everything's shaking. This is the Paris Journal, 1944 to 1955. Now, she covers Paris in the 1950s as well, and the 40s, which is a period of rebirth, and she's talking about Richard Wright. She's talking about Le Club Saint-Germain, where early jazz is happening for the French. The French lose their goddamn minds for jazz. Visitors who want jazz nightclub life will certainly find it on the left bank in the Saint-Germain-des-Prés quarter, which has become what Montparnasse used to be. Claustrophilia is the Saint-Germain fashion, with the boîtes in the basement, some of them authentic 18th century cellars that are still unventilated after all these years. The best new club of the kind is in the basement of the Vieux Colombier Theatre, with the gifted Claude Luter's jazz hot and Black French The best new club of the kind is the basement under the Vieux Colombier Théâtre with the gifted Claude Luther's Jazz Hot and Black French African natives singing home songs. The Rose Rouge Club on the Rue de Rennes feature Les Frères Jacques, a troupe of talented young actors who have become the star entertainers of Paris. That's 1949. At this point, this lady's freaking old, man. She just gets it. She just gets it. And this is her time in Paris. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed what you learned, I really recommend just look up Janet Flanner on YouTube. She's got some great interviews. Pick up one of her books. You get lost in them. It's absolutely insane. And as always, if you liked what you saw, please subscribe and check out some of the other women that I talk about. Thanks so much.